Hey there, Marina.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing okay. How about yourself?
Pretty good.
Bouncing between meetings and quick lunch and seeing container breakout vulnerabilities dropping, and
Yeah, it's a busy day.
it is. It is. You've been busy in the issue database.
Yeah, I did a bunch of issue organization this week. I should probably make a project board or something, right, to make it official.
As long as it's somewhere that we can track it.
Yeah, that's why I figured I'd separate that one kind of major issue I made into ones that we can actually address and deal with.
Yeah, when I saw the major issue, I was like, I don't know what to say to this one because I didn't know, like, it's the big ball. Yeah, I want to jump in there and help out, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah, so I think this way we can like prioritize and like get some stuff done.
Hey, folks.
Hi, Steve.
Um,
Rita, did you want to engage in a separate meeting with Nate, or like, are you good, or just wanted to make sure you had what you needed for the?
oh yeah, I'll probably message him on Slack and make sure that we can get that organized, either in a meeting or just by talking on Slack. We'll see how it goes.
I'm trying to figure out how to do the next steps, because I'm sure I'm missing the complexity of keeping the content in individual repos to not commingle all of the PR approvals and the disjointed, things, or, it's nice to be able to do one PR and have the docs and the code that matches it in one PR as opposed to two. And it's not just two PRs, it's the timelines of getting approvals that would be complex. So, and for some reason, I just have this very simplistic view that there's a docs folder under each repo, and somehow it, it doesn't have to copy it over to another PR, but some automated job that creates the website. I'm sure I'm missing something about that.
Yeah, and whenever we get working, I can just create that folder in this repo, and that should be easier.
Well, it sounds like there's something about the tooling, and I don't have the bandwidth to figure out what the details are. So I'm hoping somebody can help. We're trying to get some people to help on our side, even with the some of the docs. It's hard to keep up with all this content.
I was hesitating to say too much about the Docker solution because I've seen it work, but I don't know what it actually does under the covers. So I'm like, I know it does something, but there's like a magic happens here step that I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a company solving a company's doc problem, they have dedicated people that are thinking about it as opposed to some project that knows how to do this.
They do, but they're not Microsoft. They're like, the whole company is less than 100 people now. So we're talking like maybe 2 people that are dedicated to it right now at most.
But they booted it up, right? They set it up. So yeah. Again, I don't know the details. I'm just saying, like, I know how Microsoft does their doc stuff, and because there's dedicated and full-time employees, it gets very complex, even when we have vendors do it. And I don't think that's reproducible, is what I'm saying for this. Yeah. So there's got to be some kind of open source documentation project-y thing that deals with this complexity. This doesn't feel like a wheel we need to reinvent.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I just hopefully I don't know. That's why I was wondering if you or I could ping Nate. Maybe Bridget or somebody might have more info ideas, or even Josh. I think Josh did something with the distribution spec docs, and I think Vanessa was also proposing something there. So.
Oh yeah, I think I remember that discussion. I can see if they have a solution.
Yeah, Vanessa's like the most recent one that I thought was building something to do something similar to this. Like,
she did over on OCI. You'll see some of her stuff over there.
Okay.
There's been an outgoing or an ongoing pull request, open issue. I'm not sure because it's like, I think it's a request that needs a repo created and stuff like that.
Oh, thanks, Marina, for the reminder.
Yeah, it's just linked to the notes. I have a very terse agenda, but I figured we can start there and see what else we want to discuss. I meant to have some pull requests for the code part as well this week, but talk preparation stuff got away from me. So I mostly did issue management for this.
Are you going live to KubeCon?
Yeah, that's the current plan anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw on the KubeCon speaker helpy channel thing, like Justin and I got out of sync because apparently they won't let UK people into the US, even if they're
Yeah.
vaccinated, which is
Yeah,
really
I heard
weird.
about this.
I was going to be co-presenting the Tough Talk with Joshua, but he's in the UK, so now I'm just giving it on my own because
Oh no.
we're not sure you can make it.
Yeah, and Justin's in the same spot, which is weird. Is I literally have family that aren't vaccinated that came into the country, no questions asked. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not trying to get into all that. It's what I was more curious is, have you thought about what if you don't go? Like if we don't go, like, is there I don't know, maybe I'll ping Amy, figure out what the plan is there. Is there another window by which it's just weird?
Yeah, because I was really looking forward to getting to see people in person again, but
Yeah.
it's looking less and less like they'll be all the people I want to talk to in person. Like, so I don't know.
All right. Anyway, didn't mean to digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, because it'd be great if we could have like a notary in person. I really feel like that's what this project's been missing this whole time, is us getting in a room and figuring stuff out. But anyway, maybe not yet. Okay, so the stuff I have on the agenda. So the first thing is it's just a link to the issue tracker, because I think everything here is, except the first one, is some new issues I made. Basically what I did is I took that big issue that was a little bit unmanageable and I separated it into what are hopefully more manageable issues. It's almost a direct comparison. I think I combined a couple of issues that I thought were combinable, but mostly it's just that. And so I figure if people have ones here they want to talk about, we can use these to kind of start the conversation, see if we can get these things resolved, and then eventually merged into both the spec and implementation work on the repo. So mostly this is just an announcement. These are here. Please comment. Please add new more. You know, it's kind of this is I think setting up what we need to work on basically. So anything else that you think we need to work on, go ahead and add, or see if you have ideas about these ones. We can go through them here if we have time, but I don't know if we want to go through all of them at once. I feel like part of the point is separating them so that we can maybe focus on a couple of things to start. Like for example, I think number 3, accessing tough metadata on a registry is probably one of the first ones we'll have to address just to get any kind of prototype stuff working. Is figuring out those file formats, what we'll want that to look like when we start, as we start prototyping. So that might be a good place to start. Any thoughts
This
here?
is a good one also where, you know, the artifact spec is like, we're hoping to cut a draft, maybe even today or whatever. We'll see, you know, how fast we can get that done, because it's just loose ends of things that we already know of. But my point is that, is there something about it that you need more of or tweak or to enable, you know, the fundamental principle that, you know, there's immutable content. We want to get segments of it to move across registries, the whole copy situation. So this is the time to assure, like, this is the prototype validation. Like, let's definitely build stuff and figure out where are the weekends that we need to tighten up or add more capabilities.
Totally. I think that as far as like storing the metadata, I think that the artifact spec will work just fine, because basically all we need is a way to put kind of, you know, arbitrary content in a way that the registry won't delete it and relate it to other content in the registry. I think the slightly trickier piece is going to be the discoverability of this content. The way the tough workflow like usually works is that you start with, you know, the root metadata, and then from there you find this, you know, snapshot timestamp, top level targets metadata, and go from there. And I think without accessing everything by tag, that doesn't make quite as much sense in the registry context. And I think that particularly is the problem that we'll want to figure out as we move forward here.
Is,
What do you mean by
is there
not
stuff that
referencing by tag? Are you talking about like, because I assume,
referenced by digest?
huh?
Referenced by digest.
Well, there's that too, yeah, but I'm more referring to like when you pull a signature, you don't know the digest of the signature. You shouldn't know the digest of the signature. You know the tag converted to a digest of the thing you're trying to verify. So that's the referrers API that says, hey, give me all the references filtered by this artifact type, which could be, notary. Well, I'm hoping we don't need a different notary tough thing. I mean, obviously, if this all works, they all converge. I just want to keep on restating that. But whatever the way that you filter the thing that you want back out, is that enough for what you need? That's part of what I'm just trying to sanity test. Is there something about the referrers API that
Yeah,
is
so
what you need?
the kind of the issue, and this might be something we just need to change for the tough notary spec, is that the refer API assumes that you start with the end image you want to pull, and then that refers back to the signature, which then refers back to the thing that signed that signature. Whereas I think tough usually assumes the opposite, that you start with a root key and then you go down the delegations. I don't think there's a particular reason we can't flip that and still use the tough delegation model. I think that there's issues with prioritization of delegations that that tough gives you by going from the top down. Which we have.
Tell me what top down means. It sounds like you're saying I have a key. What is all the content signed by that key? And I don't think that's
kind of. You have a role. So you have, the way tough does it is you have so root, which signs the top level targets, which is the top level targets is kind of like a root signing key for something like TLS or whatever, in that it delegates authority to what we can call intermediaries, which are other targets metadata files, which then delegate to leaves, which then sign the actual content. The thing that tough does slightly differently is that it doesn't delegate all of its authority to each of those intermediaries. It has the ability to say, like, this intermediary is only trusted for, Microsoft stuff, or, not to pick on Microsoft, but, for some companies' stuff, or some subset of the space.
But would you, like, what I'm struggling with is, like, if I look at a Kubernetes deployment file, just using it as the standard open source between all cloud neutral things, is it says I'm trying to deploy netmonitor v1, maybe netmonitor and the digest, right? Either one of those.
Yeah.
That's the thing it's trying to deploy. Then yes, your policy brings along and says, hey, by the way, I'm only going to allow things that are signed by these keys. So it's not that it doesn't start with the root metadata, because it actually doesn't. What it does, it at first has a filter that says, what in this, of all the things that are out in the world, and even this one registry, am I trying to pull? Now it has something. Now it can kind of look at that root key and go like, okay, I have the thing. What is related to that thing, and filtered by artifact type? And it says, okay, now I have the things. Do any of those actually match a tough delegation key that I need?
Yeah, and I think all this is doing, is just combining the policy with the key distribution mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way tough has been designed, is just to solve both the policy piece and the key distribution piece using the same delegation model. Again, I don't think, like, there are ways, I think, to separate this, and that's definitely what we can talk about. I think just like as things are today, I think that's the piece that we need to figure out to get it to work with the delegation, with the what's it called, the artifact spec. Yeah, sorry, Jay.
Yeah, so maybe I can give some background, because we did implement content trust in ACR, and one of the key challenges that we faced with the tough V1 model was you have to go to a different catalog to kind of find out what the tags are, because the tag collection is signed and there's a whole security model associated with it. So it does solve one problem. But from a runtime deployment perspective, none of these runtimes know how to do the second order discovery, right? So if you can solve the discovery and move that to standard registry APIs, then you don't have to have yet another catalog that needs to be kept. And the catalog goes out of sync very quickly also, because you expect signed content, and the signed content versus image drift. So the largest challenge was also that we had to establish yet another database to keep these tags in sync. and being able to kind of like float that around with a different backend, like a SQL based backend and all that was one of the bigger challenges that we faced. So what I want to kind of like tease apart here is, can we kind of like consider that the registry might be the source of what you say, information, not trusted information, because nobody trusts the registry is the default assumption. But that information can be validated as a second stage. For example, Kubernetes, you have a tag to digest converter, like a mutation controller that actually does this. So these are the places that we would like to plug in, rather than have yet another catalog of things to kind of look at and keep track of. I think that's where the root of the problem is. After that, everything is just standard. Like you validate your signature, you get your key store. I don't think there's anything different from any of the models here. So would it be possible to call out that if we were to kind of like formulate a goal for a tough, try not to kind of fragment the definition of truth between two stores altogether, besides the move model that we can discuss separately.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the big goals here is to get as much of this as possible onto the registry itself, because the running Notary, I think, as a side service was a big usability challenge, as you say. Yeah, so that's a big piece. And I think that's part of why this discovery is a little bit trickier, because what Notary v1 did was it basically just sidestepped the problem by sticking the tough stuff somewhere else and just doing the traditional tough workflow in that other place without worrying about registries. Whereas now we're trying to say, okay, so how can we actually put this stuff on the registry? What can you pull by to get the tough stuff from the registry, and in what order will you do that? That's kind of
we'd create that issue with V1, where if you try to pull something like Nginx latest right now, you'll get a 6 or probably almost 12-month-old version of the package at this point. And
you'll get something different if you pull with Notary or without Notary, which is really weird.
Yes.
And I think by putting it all in the registry, that won't happen. So even if you're not even if you're not checking these signatures, you should get the same thing. Just maybe, it could be insecure or whatever, but it shouldn't be different.
Yeah, and the point is that if somebody, let's say they update an insecure tag, right? The point is none of the frameworks will be able to trust that image, and that's okay. That's a conscious step, because people know how to interact with the registry, especially with containers and images. It would be good if we can say that, hey, as a part of this push, it's up to the security workflow or pipeline to make sure that there is a signature, and not kind of diverge the signature with the content itself.
Yeah, agreed. It's nice if when you pull the image, it says this is secure, insecure, rather than saying this is the secure image and this is the insecure image. And you get two different images.
And of which you don't have access to the it's not a matter of it's secure and insecure images. It's which one can I run? It's like the big ActiveX button on browsers. Like all I see is which one do I press to make it work?
Steve, you don't run that.
I don't what?
You don't run ActiveX. That's it. End of story.
Okay, it's just showing my dated times. I don't know what the current thing is of just make it work, but that is how all things worked on the internet for a while. Not all, but most. Anyway, the point is that yes, like I'm just trying to make fun of we have to fix the obvious.
So yeah, I think we can discuss this on the issue for sure and here, but I think that this is going to be part of the part that I'm going to want help most with from all of you who do more stuff on registries than I do, because I can make something that will push stuff to registries, but I don't know if it'll be the correct.
Yeah, I can certainly help when we're talking about what to push to a registry and how we can store it. The parts I need to know about are on the tough side. And so I'm thinking about your original question of if we invert this model and say we're going to do verify from the bottom up, is there stuff that potentially breaks that we have to worry about? And I'm thinking we verify the image, now we have to go up and verify that it's in the snapshot, and we didn't come down from the snapshot first. Now how do we know we're in the right snapshot? Exactly.
I think that the snapshot is definitely one piece of that, making sure you have the correct one of those. Really, I think you can kind of do that on the side of the verification chain. I think that the trickiest part is going to be those prioritized delegations, making sure that you're or maybe we don't need those, but that's the thing that would break, basically. Okay. That we should think about before we break it is because in tough metadata stuff is ordered, like, you should look here and then here for this particular image. And if you get a signature for here, you have to know that here didn't have it before you can validate this, which when you go bottom up, it becomes like a weird up and down tree search, which is probably not ideal.
Which we might just be in a situation we say that's something we don't need to solve from our side because we've already told the person this was the image that we intentionally wanted to get.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe that's the answer. But we'll want to be explicit about that because we are changing the guarantee.
The tough model and the guarantee. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's always been the thing, right? If we didn't need to change anything, then what was wrong with V1 and all the other stuff? So
Yeah.
there's always been an assumption we need to fix things on all the elements of this, including embracing the copy across registries piece. So I dropped some links in there for using ORAS and the instance of distribution so that you can test the the notary tough parts with, and you don't have to worry about the notation CLI yet because that makes it some other different assumptions. So that should give you the raw pieces. In all fairness, that is slightly dated, and I'm actually not sure if that exact script builds, but we're automating all the builds over the last week or two. So I don't know, Sajid, how close are we to have a match of ORAS with Discover and Push that works with distribution that people can test independently?
A bunch of PRs on both that need to be reviewed. It's taking its time. I don't know. Absolute date maybe.
Okay, I thought
Can estimate maybe next week. No, that doesn't work with the refers API.
Where's the one that
so
does? We have a refers API version.
We do, but it's not merged in, and it's still under review. So
no, but I was getting a build from it. Was it just because I pulled it from the branch?
yeah, you just building it from a branch. You're not building it from main.
Okay, let us know when you're ready. Within the next, I think we can get you one. It just may not be from a main branch.
Okay.
And I really just what I'm mainly trying to do is enable you with the fundamentals so that you can focus on your unique area.
Yeah, exactly. And this is part of the reason I've been waiting a little bit to implement it is I wanted this reference type thing to be at a stage where at least it can work on top of it.
Yeah.
Because instead of reinventing that again.
Yeah. Justin and Steve are responsible to cut a draft spec today. Let's see how that goes.
Okay, very cool. So yeah, so if it's at that stage, I'll try and finagle the tough metadata to fit into that shape basically, and then see if we can make that work.
Without
Yeah, just the spec is what we plan to release. The thing that Sajid's talking about, there's a couple of nit things before we can officially declare it. That part, and that's the part I really want to make sure there's something missing. That's why we're declaring as a draft to say, hey, we think we're done. Tell us what we don't know. Like we don't know what we don't know. The piece that I want to give you though is the ORAS and the distribution instance of that, because we've been building those up. It's just they keep on getting out of sync. That's one of the reasons why I want to declare a draft version. So now we say, okay, everybody is in sync. So I can give you some builds of it. Just let us know when you're ready, because I want to make sure that there's nothing we're missing.
Brandon, you were saying something. Sorry, I cut off.
No problem. I was going to say, without the reference types included in ORAS, is the current ORAS that's checked into May, is that just implementing the OCI artifact without, the original OCI artifact?
That's what it is.
Okay.
So it's very simple. If you look at it right now, I think Steve did the rewording last, which is the OCI artifact is about putting the media type on the image spec config, versus we would actually have a linked manifest for the ORAS artifact or the reference artifact. I had another question, which is kind of like the next challenge. Maybe it's the second issue that we want to tackle, which is repositories by themselves, collections of tags in tough in Notary V1. That became the second issue because a build pipeline would not be able to target a specific tag. They would kind of like sign the entire collection again, right? Is that the model that you want Tough V2 to follow? Because that assumes that if you have 10,000 tags, and we do have customers who have 10,000 and even more number of tags, how do you see this becoming a, how do you see this going forward? Because that unified collection, maintaining that unified collection, is it necessary for Notary V2 is the question that I had.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces here. I think that Tufts supports more layers of delegation than Notary V1 did. I think for various reasons that I don't fully understand, Notary V1 decided to like basically flatten the delegation ability of Tufts to just allow I think one level of delegations. So you can make, individual signatures a lot smaller by just making that bigger, adding more layers of delegation. And I don't think there's anything even technical in Notary V1 that wouldn't let that happen. It's just it wasn't exposed via any of the pieces. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is the snapshot piece, which I think is the bigger discussion.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, which is if you have a whole collection, especially as we look at having Tufts delegate from something broader than an individual registry, or sorry, individual repository on a registry. I always get that wrong. I think in some cases, obviously, like if you're, for the privacy and whatever, some people might want it on their individual repository, but for people like Docker, people who are doing these kind of public registries, having just one root key for the whole thing makes the whole tofu problem a lot easier to solve. But that would, in using kind of traditional Tufts semantics, mean that that entire registry would need to be included within a single snapshot file, which is probably
what about the manifest size limit? But there's potential ways that you can shard that.
yes.
You could...
So yeah, I have a proposal for basically splitting up the snapshot metadata into a Merkle tree, which would make it a lot smaller for individual files. I think that there are ideas using like transparency logs or other external services to get the consistency property without having to have that file on the registry, which is another angle we could go with that. So yeah, that's definitely one of the problems we're gonna have to solve though. I think probably part two. I think part one is getting the targets metadata delegations working on a registry. I think that'll get us like 70% there. And then for the last 30%, we'll have to figure out the snapshot problem.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so I'm aware it's a problem. Basically, I don't have a good answer for you. But
That's a tough one because one of the challenges is that I'll give you a real world example. So our Kubernetes customers, they have images from both Docker Hub and different registries, but they want to pinpoint or like pin Docker Hub certain repositories to certain keys. They don't care about the rest of Docker Hub actually. So they might say that I trust Canonical and that's about it. And I trust Canonical only for the official Ubuntu images coming from here, or maybe some published versions of Ubuntu or compiler or something like that. And we would have another set of images that they say they only trust from Microsoft. So this composition is what's kind of getting challenging from a runtime perspective, right? So you have a trust policy that is actually composing. I think Brandon has a pretty nice discussion kind of talking about the trust policy and the different ways the keys can be absorbed. If we can kind of like compose those two in such a way that you have different registries in the runtime, you should be able to kind of like have your client understand, okay, for this image, I need to look here. And the keys are different for each scope in some way. The snapshots are the second problem because you typically ask to deploy specific images. You never ask to deploy a repository. That concept doesn't exist. You say, I want this image. So being able to target the signature or the whole walk of just that entity is kind of important from a snapshotting perspective. So if you can kind of like split from a runtime validation perspective, this is how we expect runtimes to work with the Tufts, and the snapshot is might or might not be used, would be something like as a problem definition, if you can kind of call it out. How useful is the snapshot? Like the collection snapshot is kind of like one of the things I would ask.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we can definitely, I would want some feedback on from all of you. I think that the properties that Snapshot gives you in Tufts are primarily timeliness and consistency. I think consistency, we don't care about so much in the context of registries, because I think the way registries store stuff as opposed to traditional package managers, I'm not sure it's as much of a problem, but the timeliness one is a big thing. basically what the snapshot in Tough gives you is that by listing all the files and version numbers in one place, and then attaching basically a heartbeat, the timestamp heartbeat to that, so you know that this is the most recent version of all the images, of all the metadata, sorry, not the images, that's on the registry. You can make sure that if any like signature is replaced, if any artifact is revoked, if anything like that happens, you will see the version of the registry that includes that revocation or that change. And by having the snapshot file, you only have to do that once instead of having all of these constantly updating heartbeat files. So it makes that problem a lot easier.
So I think the question then is, to what is that heartbeat snapshot associated with? Because to Sajay's point, like, I don't think it wants to be all things in a repo, certainly not a registry, probably not even a repo, because we know multiple teams put lots, they actually have different tag streams in the same repo. So, but let me just run with this idea for a second, because the thing that I've always seen Tough do well with, especially for like the car deployments, I forgot what that stack is called.
The Optane stuff.
The what?
Optane.
Yeah, Optane, thank you. That it's very targeted, that a car and and other releases have a very streamed set of very specific things that they want, and they only want that thing, and they want the newest version of exactly that thing. Makes perfect sense, even for some of the OS updates. I think I saw somebody was doing. A registry concept isn't necessarily the same thing. There's lots of things that get put into that registry and that repo, repo. And somebody may not want the next one, they want the one after that, right? There's that stream. But, well, okay, that's one thing. So now how does that play out? Digests are always unique. So you can't really do a version of a digest, because that's by itself not a thing. But there is versions of a tag. What I mean by versions of a tag is tag is one of the few things that is immutable in a registry. So if I send, hey, version v1.10, or actually 1, there's a couple of different tagging schemes. I'm going to write this down. There's a 1, and there's a concept of 1.0.0.0. And the concept of 1 is there's a star and it floats. What I'm kind of getting at is, if I update a specific tag, there is a real good versioning thing there. Like, I do want to know that this particular tag that I've asked for got changed. I may not care. I may choose to ignore it for whatever reason. So there needs to be some break glass. But at a tag scope, there's a lot of value in that. And what's really interesting is at the tag scope, now you've got a small enough amount of data that you can actually copy that. Not only is it scoped, so it's segmented in a registry, so you don't have all this collision going on, but I could also scope that when that artifact gets copied to another registry, you can copy just that metadata with it. And I'm sure there's a couple of holes in here, but the point is, like, there's a really narrow scope that can help a lot.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here. I definitely think that actually signatures in general, no matter how we're implementing them, are more useful for pulling by tag than pulling by digest, because if you're pulling by digest, like, what you're verifying with the signature is the digest. And so if you're already pulling by digest, you gain a little bit less from any kind of signature validation than you do when pulling by tag.
Part of, but do you know, like, yes, the digest is unique, but how do you know that that digest wasn't created by Evil Co?
Yeah, I mean,
so that's the signature part. Like, if people literally know what the digest was created, they can assure that's the same digest that got released. So there's like this, I forget, maybe Brendan knows it. There's like some signing thing, some locking, Docker lock, I think was what it's called. The problem is, I don't want to track those individual digests. I want to track good co's. Anything that comes from good co until I'm told otherwise is considered valid. And then it's like, okay, what is the repo tag that I'm trying to deploy? As long as it's good co, signature is still valid, woohoo, I'm happy.
Yeah. And then I think so, like, the other half of your question, I think, is basically, I think this is something that we often explain wrong, and myself included, when explaining Tough, is that the Tough snapshot doesn't actually track the versions of artifacts so much as it tracks the versions of the Tough metadata files, which is kind of a subtle difference. Basically what it means is that, like, if I sign a digest, a tag, or whatever today, and then I choose not to sign that tag or digest or whatever when I publish new metadata tomorrow, the Tough snapshot will ensure that you always get the version today that doesn't include that signature, or the version today that does include, a new signature that that wasn't there yesterday.
So if I follow that stream, I have NetMonitor V1 and I sign it. And then
Yeah.
tomorrow I push an update to NetMonitor V1, but it's not signed. What you're basically saying is I can get yesterday's digest that's tied to V1.
Yeah, so what you can do is you can include like
Just wait, before you run off, I just want to digest that one. Is that what, because it's just making my head hurt a little bit. I'm just trying to, I want to.
Yeah. So basically what it means is, like, say you have NetMonitor, your example, you have V1 of it that you released yesterday. You sign it, you release it, you do everything correctly. Today you release V2, you're working really fast, releasing V2 the next day. But you also want, people are still using V1. So this time you sign both V1 and V2. And
Okay, they're separate tags.
Yeah.
So
I'm assuming tags for now. You could mostly the same logic will work for digest. But we can get to that in a second. So now you have with your key, you are signing both V1 and V2 and saying these are both good. Days pass. V1, let's say, has a vulnerability. You now publish new metadata that signs V2 but not V1. You say, V1 is still on this registry, but I am no longer attesting that you should use it, basically, or whatever that means to you. At that point, the tough heartbeat will make it so that that you're getting this version after that file was revoked, and you're not getting the old metadata, because otherwise that old metadata can be replayed.
No, I hear you. The thing, right? These are trying to piece all these things together, right? It's the Gaudi modeling thing, so all the contractors can work together. The thing I'm struggling is when it's released as V2, the fact that it says V2 versus V1 isn't an assumed update, right? That's an opt-in update. Now, if you pushed an update to the V1 tag, because it's not meant to be a feature enhancement, it's meant to be, a security fix of some sort, that's a different scenario as opposed to it's another tag. So what I'm trying to get at is, I think we've always had this problem with registries that when a tag gets updated, how do I know that all my deployments are in sync? Because if I only pull it by the tag, then, and somebody's not following a best practice of doing unique tagging, then you can do a scale up scenario, and now this node is out of sync with the rest. So the idea is that you should be doing new builds or new tags.
I think what Tough can get you is it can make sure that you when you're pulling right now are getting the latest version of that mapping. I think that there is still some client policy that said that you need to have to say, you have to update everything at the same time if you're going to update it, because obviously if you need consistency across your deployments, I don't think that's a problem that we can solve at this level. That needs to be at the client's policy.
And with Notary, I've been looking at solving that the other direction, which is that you would sign your digest, and in that signature, you would say this digest is also known with these tags. And that way you would have potentially multiple digests in there that all say I'm version 2. And until you explicitly go out there and say, okay, let me revoke that old one because I don't trust that anymore, you could verify all those, and that would handle the scenario where someone redeploys an old image out there in the field that, it's not the latest, but you still trust it.
Yeah, Tough can handle, you can just list multiple. I don't actually know. That might be an interesting thing to look at. I don't think in Tough as is, you can list multiple things with the same name that are different within the same signature.
Yeah. This gets to what are we actually going to sign? Because if we try to sign the tags, then we're going to potentially have a challenge. If we just sign the digest, and then that digest points to something that we can verify, whatever that pointer is, that can include a reference to a tag, then we might be okay.
Yeah, because I remember in the discussion, we started by saying maybe we don't need to sign tags, but it really became obvious that that was a use case that a lot of people cared about. Maybe that's changed, but
oh no, it's still there. It's a scoping piece, and
I think
we need to address it.
That we'll want actually two slightly different paths for whether you're pulling something by digest or by tag. And one of those paths include this additional tag resolution step, which is very similar to what Notary V1 already does, but just on the registry. Whereas pulling by digest, and actually, this is the other thing about that that walking backwards thing I was talking about earlier is you have to walk backwards according to Tough. If you pull by
You can
digest.
walk backwards, but starting from where? Like, I think the piece was, I don't want to walk backwards for everything that this key is signed. I want to walk backwards from, all right, I've now targeted the tag or digest that the users asked for deployment. Now walk that path.
Yeah, so that the second one is what I mean. Like you have to do it in that order from the you pull the digest and it references back to the signature when you pull by digest, because the namespacing approach doesn't make any sense if you're pulling like the Tough client workflow doesn't work for pulling by digest, so we'd have to reverse it anyway, which seems to be in line with a lot of the work that's going on here anyway. I think Trisha might want to weigh in there as well, but I'll get Sajay go.
So this is great. I'm happy that we're actually capturing these things somehow. The last part was the timeliness, the signature update story, right? One thing is that I know from operating a registry, I don't want to operate and sign a signature update service. It's just too fragile, and we cannot kind of like honor all the requirements of having the keys in an enclave and things like that. It's just not a registry's area of expertise. I would say if we were to do tooling, we should scope tooling in such a way that the timing, the updates of the snapshots and the updates of signatures can be run in another environment altogether. So there's tooling that they can run, they can extend, and maybe put a daemon set or something like that in their own trusted signing service, and give them some guidance as to, okay, you need to update the signatures for these things on this particular cadence, and this is what would be the tooling that this team can provide to other signature, the signers per se, because that's an entirely different use case from, and I think I understand that it's important in the whole Tough space to keep the signatures and updated. So it's fair to say that you have separate tooling that does not require the push workflow to do all the signatures as needed in some way. So it would be good to at least capture that we have to have some tooling that can be run outside the registry for signatures, for the timeliness as well, not just for the initial sign and creation of signatures and validation.
I agree. I think that's going to be a key piece to getting the snapshot timestamp stuff to work, is that either having a lot of this work happen on the client side when you're generating the signatures, it also can generate some of this other stuff, or pushing it to, like, maybe there's like an intermediary that then pushes that information to the registries. And maybe some registries would want to run that themselves, but I don't think that should be required by any means. Let people specialize. And we can lay out which pieces could do that. That's a good idea.
So a piece that we kind of skip by a little bit that I just want to make sure we capture is the kind of like the use case and the scenarios we're trying to enable, because the idea that you would know that V1 is somehow predecessor to a tag named V2 is part of the thing that I'm struggling with a little bit. Because tags just don't have semantic versioning of sequences. It's all convention. There's no agreement on it, and I think that's where there's fragility and questionability of whether that's what I would a customer would actually use, a user would use.
Yeah, I think that
a no-brainer. Sorry, I want to, before I leave you in vagueness, I want to come to a really concrete place that we can know. I know we can add value. Is if you could say, here's the history of digest to a tag, a very specific tag. That's a versioning that you could even use that convention to provide tremendous value, because that actually starts to solve the tag signing problem as well. I have to think more about it, but that's why I think we should write down more of the scenarios before we run through the tech part of it. Because if I think there's a huge opportunity, like I said, and two, my initial scrub of it starts to say that also solves a lot of the complexity and scalability things that we've been having as we copy across registries and across repos. So maybe just writing down what it is that we think we're trying to solve can say, like, oh yeah, that's huge value, didn't realize it. Wait, we don't even follow that convention in registries, or there's no universal agreement that's the model.
Yeah, and I think that basically, I think the main thing is that like clients already have their own workflows where they say, I want to pull this thing, whether this thing is a digest, it's a tag, it's a whatever. And I think all we want to do is to support them pulling whatever the thing they think they want is, and telling them whether or not they're whether or not it's signed according to their policy and the tough metadata associated with that policy. So, and I do think that the version of a particular tag is exactly what we should be signing rather than anything else. Yeah, I agree. That makes sense.
I think there's interesting things about, conventions around tags, and I'd love to get more stability in the community around that, because it comes up a lot, especially when we start to talk about broader artifacts than just containers. But it's an incremental, like, I think if we can show value, solid value here, then they could say, oh, if I could use that there, which is obvious to me, I'm just trying to pick an obvious thing that hopefully is obvious to everybody. Then the more nebulous, non-obvious places like, oh, but if I can use it this way and this way, then we could start to build some better consensus around, basically some semblance of semantic versioning with the ability to update an existing version, because you can't update a digest. This is one of the reasons why I don't like deploying by digest in an environment. I like deploying by a unique tag, because if you get into a spot where you can't fix a deployment for some reason because there's a hard reference, you can actually change the digest that's behind that tag. So you get a break glass scenario for environments that you don't necessarily control. So there's.
But I do want to partition that. That is a deployment runtime choice and decision of how the controller decides to do it. That has actually got nothing to do with signatures, because semantic versioning doesn't guarantee that the content that is passed is actually validatable, right? So you have the digest that is content verification, but you also have the signature aspect itself, which is I attest to this. So the attestation doesn't matter whether it's old or new. And I want to make sure that we don't try to solve the scope of how Kubernetes might choose to deploy a certain tag. That is way out of, like, that's a different place. And there are multiple projects, right? Like there's Flux CD, there is different teams that do different projects that do tag discovery in a particular way. I think what I've seen is that tags are the source of truth for any deployer. What stands behind the tags is what the solution should probably try to attest to. Anyway, that's my take on this.
And just because a new signature is put on a new thing doesn't mean it's actually going to work in the consumer's environment. Like, yes, I've shipped a security fix, but it broke because I was expecting some behavior, because a security fix is a change in functionality and behavior. That behavior may surface, but there's many use cases, many scenarios where the fix was actually more damaging than the original problem. So that's the thing about the other break glasses. Just because the producer produced something doesn't mean the consumer should take it right away. Anyway,
tags are really complicated because you can have multiple things the tag has pointed to in the past, and so it is mutable in that case. You can also have clients that are deployed in the field that have the old version of that image and don't know about the new one yet, and they're still trying to redeploy that because scaling events, something like that. So it's challenging to me to say the registry can be the only source of truth, just because things like that can get out of sync, and you've got that history, and the registry can only ever point to one thing. And it's one of those things where the registry can only point to one, but we need to be able to verify multiple, and so it gets complicated there and not an easy answer to solve on the one-off. I do want to take a slightly different turn of direction though, which is how much of the stuff we're doing is scoped to one repository versus multi-repository, because that gets into questions of things like reference types. I think can only span within a specific repository. You can't span cross repository, can you? Especially when you get into garbage collection and things like that. So that gets into some of the models for how we can structure this stuff, that certain things are only going to be able to stay within one repository, and then how you get it to go across multiple repositories is going to be an extra challenge for us.
That's interesting. I didn't know that they couldn't span across repositories, because yeah, exactly. The goal would be to let the users decide how big of a scope of a span they want it to be, as large as the whole universe, as small as a single artifact. And that would basically be, depending on how large of a root they want to control, how large of, whatever,
Yeah.
how
And-
much
and
stuff.
so there-
What's the scenario we're trying to enable? Maybe that'll help me, because it's not that we didn't want to do cross repo stuff. We tried doing that to enable Helm scenarios where there's a very logical reason why you want.
think of like snapshots and timestamps. So the timestamp is going to be potentially for an entire organization of, snapshots of a whole bunch of the repositories.
Or even just the
That's a
target.
solution. I'm still going back. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And this goes back to, I know that Tough and was built around certain expectations.
Well,
of
I
a
think
single public
even
registry.
just like the delegations, like if you have a delegation that you want to be accessible from different repositories that all use that same root key, or the same intermediate root, whatever you want to call it, key, they all need access to that signed metadata with those delegations.
I would also see scaling as another one of the challenges. And if you've got a large registry that's trying to do a lot of timestamps, you don't want to do a timestamp per every repo. You'd rather get that isolated down to maybe per organization.
Exactly. Now that's actually part of what makes it actually easier to manage at the larger scale, is that you only need that one timestamp.
So Steve, am I,
I'm still struggling a little bit on the need kind of thing. Like I don't,
so,
the
so before we
technology can always
answer
get used in
that,
lots of interesting. What's the need?
yeah, so before we answer that, let me make sure my concern is valid though. When we get into like reference types, Steve, is your understanding the same as mine, that a reference type is going to be within the same repository?
We have scoped it down. We tried, if you look back at Artifacts PR 27, we initially tried that, and basically there was a bunch of questions and concerns that we weren't able to make any progress. So I did scope it down to be single repository, because
Yeah.
all of the supply chain types make sense to be in the same repository. It's the Helm kind of scenarios, Helm and CNAB, where it makes sense that they're referencing cross. So we've deferred all of that for now until we can get more confidence on the scope of a single repo.
Yeah,
Depending on what you're trying to do, though, I'm not saying what you could.
The model that I was thinking about, and I think this might have been Brandon's idea initially, is that you'd have a particular repository on the registry that includes like root metadata, for example, top level targets metadata, and you would need to, from some other repository, be able to reference the metadata in this root registry in order to get that content. Or otherwise, you'd have to duplicate that content across all these different places, which seems silly.
So the one challenge, I think, when we spoke about the cross repo scenario in the reference API was like basically lifetimes of the signature, right? So say, for example, if somebody deletes a specific repository or a specific image, do we keep those things around, or how do we know what we need to keep was one of the challenges. But I think that's solvable if we can kind of describe the ownership model of the timestamp snapshots as needed. What I'm trying to get to is there is a value in only one entity being updated so when I think of an organization, it's like a team or a sub team that manages maybe 50 different images or 100 different images, and they can then go update them together, and they will be across repositories most of the time. So it makes sense to have some scoping where we can say that all these repos belong to some organization, which doesn't exist right now in the registry, right? In the registry, a repository is a standalone entity. There is no concept of siblings. There is a virtual namespacing. Like you look at the repository, squint at it, you feel like it's actually logical folders, but it's a big joke. It's not the way that it works internally, right? Everything is flattened out and the scopes are all unique. So we need to probably like consider how we can think about multiple repositories as a single scope, if at all we want to solve this problem.
I know that's kind of why I was thinking of kind of faking it by adding another repository that points to these other repositories, if that makes sense. So that's, instead of it actually being a hierarchy, you kind of fake the hierarchy. Like
that makes sense. I mean, that also might solve another question that was asked, which is, I want to keep these signatures around, but I don't want to store the images. So can I have a sidecar set of a sidecar repo that I can give permission to that can be pulled from, but only the signer can push to. So it's a different model that I think those are options we should discuss. That's great.
Yeah, but unfortunately, those do require us to have the artifacts reference across repositories to make any of that stuff work.
Oh, so that's what I want to tweak
sense.
on. So it's like, I think there's a couple pieces. One, I don't buy the things cross repos for the signatures for the graph. There's more complexities to value, and like there's a conversation that would be nice to have a nice collaborative, constructive conversation. I haven't seen that happen yet. So I'm going based on the conversations I've had with customers and the experience that we've had in this problem. And when you walk it through with them, they're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. So I haven't had any pushback on that. Two things. One, the Helm thing makes perfect sense because by definition, there are other repos because it's the name of the thing, right? So the specific thing, assuming there was a use case where I did want to create some kind of metadata file that spans all repos, the content that's in an artifact could have anything you want. You can store stuff in there that says, here's all these repos. It's just a matter of the registry is not going to know about it. The concept of the reference types is to enable a registry to know about its dependencies for generic content. Like if you look at regular other package managers, they're all specific to a particular one. NPM knows it, RPM, and so forth. And they can defer to the client because there's a client that knows how to deal with NPM. If you had one registry that had to deal with NPM, RPM, Debian, container images, you're not going to want to chase them all. That's actually how we came to the artifact approach in the first place when we were doing AZ, ACR Helm, AZ, ACR CNAT, AZ, ACR Singularity, like, it doesn't scale. So my point is that although reference types are designed around a single repo because they're trying to copy a graph between those, what a particular artifact pushes up to a registry, there's no constraint whatsoever to that. So if you want to create a, not timestamp, which file is it? The
snapshot?
Snapshot. If you want to create a snapshot that has metadata about all the repos in a registry or a scope set of them, party on. There's nothing that the registry needs to do because the registry isn't tracking the details of what's being pushed in.
Yeah, so I guess we can just do the same model and just put the reference, not in the reference type for these different, for the, I guess, reverse delegations is what I'm going to call them. You put that into, you put that into the metadata itself, and then that knows which registry, which repository to look at to find that, and then you follow the chain within that. Okay.
Because that gives you the validation within that registry. And now when you want to copy a particular artifact to another one, you can, I don't know how we're going to do this yet. This is why we want to start incubating prototypes, is now you could say, I'm actually, of all the things in this registry or whatever scope that you're trying to do, I'm only trying to copy this one thing. So now I can pluck out that specific information and copy it to the other registry, and that other registry, I don't know how it's going to do it yet, can figure out, all right, now I know my snapshot across that scope of whatever it's trying to manage.
So I think that the copying, I think we'll get to. I think that most of it will fall in place as we implement, and if it doesn't, we can figure it out. I think what I want to make sure of is that if we have this this like tough repository or whatever on the repo, or sorry, tough repo on the registry, that nothing in it gets garbage collected basically, even though it's only being referenced by stuff from other repositories.
I see. Yeah, you want to be really careful because I don't think you want the registry to track every link across. If you're literally trying to create a hash of everything in a registry, if the registry knew you uploaded that, then it wouldn't be able to delete anything in a registry.
Yeah,
you basically just created a ref count to everything. So
which is not exactly what you want, because you want to be able to replace that, obviously.
So thinking outside the box and slightly missing some of the stuff that Steve just said. If you have everything in another repository that's just, this is the tough repository of all the tough data that has pointers to all the other repos out there and all the other data and other repos, those references won't hold up anything for garbage collection at that point, because those remote images can be deleted and your remote reference is just, an ambiguous pointer. It never really pointed to anything in the first place because it was in a different repository. And then in the tough repo, you just have a tag that just points to the top. And
oh,
that's
that
going to
makes
be
a
an
lot of
index
sense.
to everything.
You basically say a not garbage collect tag.
Yeah, well, this is just the tough metadata tag because what you're going to have is a way to access that from all the other repositories. And so the other repositories have to be able to come into that and say, let me talk to the tough metadata, resolve that tag, and then resolve all the data under it.
I want to encourage writing down what it is we're trying to solve, because the cross repo permissions is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
There's no way to underestimate the amount of complexity there. Like we
It sounds like
tried.
we can solve this without it, actually, that this is making sense.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
again, I'm actually not convinced
need
you
permissions.
cross repo metadata. So I could be wrong. And that's why I'm trying to be careful and saying, look, with the reference types that a registry knows the graph is scoped to a registry for now, because that's the only use cases we know are valid that,
repository,
what did I say?
registry.
Oh, thank you. Scope to a repository. Too many R's. So that because as we've teased out the use cases and the scenarios and done the validations, that while there's always an ask to do everything, when you weigh the pros and cons, this repo scope has made sense for these kind of scenarios. We still have to solve Helm, but for these supply chain things and signatures and so forth, it makes perfect sense to scope it there. If we're trying to span multiple repos, I'm just asking, let's write down what it is that we're trying to solve, because it's not that it's not solvable, it's just enormously complex. And authentication is not a standard in any of the distribution specs. So registries have implemented different things. There's even some people that have done literally tag level permissions, which is like, holy cow.
Don't do that.
Yeah, they were trying to do a differentiation feature. It was interesting. So I'm not supporting it one way or the other. I'm just saying, let's write it down, because that will really help.
Yeah, I think I'll try and make some diagrams and possibly also code for the next meeting to see if we can go from there.
Code is awesome.
Yes.
Really,
I like diagrams.
I'll see if I can do both.
If you do both, we're
I
both
mean,
happy.
I think writing things down, to some extent, markdown and diagrams. I'm a visual person, but once you get an agreed scope, and that's what the markdown is really helpful, is what is the scope or the problem we're trying to solve? Because I feel like sometimes we go past that because we assume everybody understands the common, and we don't. And then we're off arguing some detail that, like, wait, we didn't really agree. We're building a beach house. Why are we doing this? So that's why I keep on trying to come back to, like, there's tremendous value in what you've done with Tough. How do we use it for this cross repos, permission model, cross registry, copying of content thing, so that we can get that assurance? And then it's a no brainer.
I have to run, but yes, thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you later.